The scanning beam hit the hull like a whisper, invisible and weightless, but Thomas Reeve felt it in his bones. He sat alone in the command chair of the Valor, a beaten-up frigate that had seen better decades, watching the alien ship hang in the void like a predator sizing up its prey. The vessel was enormous, sleek, organic-looking, with curves that suggested it had been grown rather than built. It dwarfed his ship 10 times over, maybe more. Thomas didn't move, didn't flinch. He'd learned a long time ago that showing fear only made things worse. The comms crackled. A voice, synthetic and cold, filtered through his speakers. "Human vessel, you will submit to analysis. Resistance is inadvisable." Thomas leaned back in his chair, arms folded across his chest. He was 43 years old, lean and weathered, with a face that had forgotten how to smile. His hair was going gray at the temples, his eyes hard as iron. He'd been out here for 6 years, alone, running freight between colonies that barely had names. No crew, no family, no one waiting for him anywhere. Just him and the void. And that was how he liked it. People were the problem. People lied. People betrayed. People left. "Go ahead and scan," he muttered, though he knew they couldn't hear him. "Not like I can stop you." The beam intensified. He could see it now, a faint shimmer of light cascading over his ship's exterior, probing every inch of metal, every circuit, every molecule. The aliens, whoever they were, had stopped him mid-jump, yanked him out of hyperspace like he was nothing. Their tech was beyond anything humanity had. Everyone knew that. Humanity was still crawling through the stars while species like this one had been out here for millennia, building empires, waging wars, and barely noticing the newcomers. Thomas had heard the stories. First contact had happened 30 years ago, back when he was just a kid. The galaxy was crowded, they said. Hundreds of species, thousands of worlds, all of them connected by trade routes and treaties and alliances that humanity wasn't part of. Humans were the newcomers, the primitives, the ones who showed up late to a party that had been going on for eons. Most species ignored them. Some pitied them. A few saw them as a curiosity, like zoo animals. And some, like the ones scanning his ship right now, saw them as prey. The scan lasted 3 minutes. Thomas counted every second. When it finally stopped, the alien ship went silent. No communication, no movement, just stillness. He waited, his hand hovering over the console, ready to hit the emergency jump if things went south. His heart was pounding, but his face stayed calm. He'd been in worse situations. Not many, but a few. Then the comms exploded with noise. Not words, just sound. Screeching, high-pitched and discordant, like metal tearing, like 1,000 voices screaming at once. Thomas jerked back, ripping the headset off his ears. The sound didn't stop. It poured through the speakers, through the walls, vibrating in his skull. He slammed his fist on the console, killing the comms, and the noise cut off abruptly. Silence. He sat there, breathing hard, staring at the alien ship. Something was wrong. The vessel was moving now, erratically, twitching like a wounded animal. Lights flickered across its surface, pulsing in chaotic patterns. Thomas watched, his pulse slowing, his instincts screaming at him to run. The comms crackled again. This time the voice was different, fractured, overlapping, as if multiple beings were trying to speak at once. "Impossible, impossible, data corrupted. Vessel contains, error, recalculate, recalculate, human biology, contradiction, neural architecture, violation of cease, cease, cease." Thomas frowned. "What the hell?" The alien ship lurched forward, then stopped. Another burst of noise came through the comms, this time softer, almost like a whimper. Then nothing. The ship went dark. Not dead, just dormant, like it had shut down. Thomas sat frozen, his mind racing. What had they seen? What had the scan found that drove them into a meltdown? He looked down at his hands, calloused and scarred. The hands of a man who'd spent his life working, fighting, surviving. There was nothing special about him. He was just a freight hauler, a nobody drifting through the void. So why had the scan broken them? He didn't have time to figure it out. The alien ship wasn't the only one out here. His sensors were lighting up with new contacts. More ships, dozens of them, converging on his position. They were coming fast, and they weren't friendly. Whatever had happened, whatever the scan had revealed, it had set off an alarm across the sector. Thomas hit the jump drive, praying it would spool up in time. The Valor shuddered, its ancient engines groaning as they pulled power from the core. 10 seconds. That was all he needed. Just 10 seconds. The new ships opened fire. Plasma bolts streaked through the void, slamming into the alien vessel that had scanned him. It didn't fight back. It just hung there, dark and silent, as the other ships tore it apart. Thomas watched in disbelief as the massive ship broke apart, pieces spinning off into the black. Then the jump drive kicked in, and the Valor vanished into hyperspace. Thomas sat alone in the command chair, staring at the swirling light of the jump tunnel, his mind reeling. What the hell had just happened? What had they seen in that scan? And why did it feel like his life had just become a whole lot more complicated? He didn't have answers, but he knew one thing for certain. Whatever they'd found, it had scared them. And that scared him. Thomas emerged from hyperspace 3 systems away, his hands shaking as he cut the engines. The Valor drifted in the shadow of a dead moon, hidden from prying sensors, while he tried to make sense of what had just happened. The scan, the screaming, the way that massive alien ship had just broken, like its crew had lost their minds in an instant. He pulled up the ship's logs, scrolling through the data recorded during the encounter. Everything looked normal until the moment the scan hit. Then the readings went haywire. Energy spikes, quantum fluctuations, stuff that shouldn't have been possible with his old rust bucket of a ship. Thomas stared at the numbers, his gut churning. Whatever they'd found, it wasn't in his cargo hold. It was in him. The thought made his skin crawl. He stood up, pacing the cramped command deck, running his hands through his graying hair. He'd been alone out here for 6 years, hauling freight, keeping to himself, avoiding the kind of entanglements that had ruined his life before. No complications, no betrayals, just him and the void. But now something had marked him, something that drove an entire alien species into madness with a single scan. His comm board chimed. Incoming transmission. Thomas froze, staring at the display. The signal was weak, encoded, coming from the outer edge of the system. He hesitated. Every instinct told him to ignore it, to jump again, to keep running. But running wouldn't give him answers, and he needed answers. He opened the channel. A face appeared on the screen. Human, middle-aged, with the kind of weathered features that came from decades in space. The man's eyes were sharp, calculating, and there was something familiar about him that Thomas couldn't place. Thomas Reeve, the man said. It wasn't a question. Who's asking? Thomas kept his voice level, his hand near the weapons console. Name's Admiral Fletcher. Terran Navy Intelligence. We need to talk. Thomas laughed, a bitter sound. Navy Intelligence. Right, let me guess. You've been tracking me for years, waiting for the right moment to make contact. This is about the scan, isn't it? Fletcher's expression didn't change. That's classified. What I can tell you is that you're in more danger than you realize. That alien ship you encountered, it was hegemony. They don't just scan random freight haulers for fun. They were looking for something specific, and apparently they found it. The hegemony. Thomas had heard whispers about them in the outer colonies, a coalition of ancient species that ruled half the galaxy, keeping younger races in line through a combination of advanced technology and brutal enforcement. They saw humans as barely evolved apes, useful only for manual labor and resource extraction. The idea that they'd been specifically looking for him was insane. "You're out of your mind," Thomas said. "I'm nobody. I haul cargo from point A to point B. That's it." "Is it?" Fletcher leaned forward. "Tell me, Thomas, when did you first realize you were different?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Different. The word he'd spent his entire life trying to avoid. Different was why his parents had sent him away as a child. Different was why the Navy had discharged him after only 2 years. Different was why his wife had left him, taking their daughter and disappearing into the inner systems where he couldn't follow. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "The pattern recognition, the way you can see connections that others miss, the intuitive understanding of technology that should be beyond human comprehension, the dreams." Thomas went cold. The dreams! He'd been having them since he was a kid. Visions of machines that didn't exist, equations that made no sense, star charts of regions no human had ever explored. He'd learned to ignore them, to push them down, to pretend they were just the product of an overactive imagination. But they'd never stopped. "How do you know about the dreams?" he whispered. Fletcher's expression softened slightly. "Because you're not the only one, Thomas. There are others, not many, but enough. We call them anomalies. Humans who display cognitive patterns that shouldn't be possible given our evolutionary history. The hegemony has been hunting them for decades. When they find one..." He shook his head. "Let's just say they don't survive the experience." Thomas sank back into his chair, his mind reeling. "Why? What do they want with us?" "That's what we're trying to figure out. All we know is that every time they capture an anomaly, they learn something that terrifies them. Something about human potential that threatens their entire world view. That's why that ship broke down after scanning you. That's why they destroyed it rather than risk the data spreading." "They destroyed their own ship?" "The other ships that showed up weren't reinforcements, Thomas. They were cleanup crew. The hegemony would rather lose a capital ship than let certain information get out. Whatever they saw in your scan, it was bad enough to trigger a containment protocol." Thomas stared at the screen, trying to process the implications. "So what now? You want me to come in? Submit to testing? Become some kind of lab rat for Navy intelligence?" Fletcher shook his head. "We're not the enemy here, Thomas. But we're also not strong enough to protect you from the hegemony. Not directly. There is another option, though. A place where people like you can be safe. Where you can learn what you really are." "Where?" "Ever heard of the fringe colonies? The systems beyond the treaty boundaries? There's a group out there. Humans who've gone off the grid, built their own society. They call themselves the Remnant. They've been taking in anomalies for years, helping them understand their abilities, preparing for the day when humanity stops running and starts fighting back." The words hung in the air between them. Thomas thought about his life, 6 years of isolation, of running from a past that had branded him as different, as dangerous. 6 years of telling himself that he was better off alone. But now the past had caught up with him. The hegemony knew what he was. They'd keep hunting him until they found him. And when they did... "The Remnant," he said slowly. "They're rebels?" "They're survivors. The question is, are you?" Thomas closed his eyes, thinking of the alien ship breaking apart, of the screaming voices on the comm, of the terror in their synthetic words. Whatever he was, whatever the scan had revealed, it was bigger than just him. The hegemony was afraid. And that meant maybe, just maybe, humanity had a chance. "Send me the coordinates," he said. Fletcher smiled for the first time. "Already done. Thomas? Be careful out there. The hegemony isn't the only thing hunting anomalies. There are others, worse things, and they all want the same thing, to understand what makes you different. Most of them won't be as gentle about it as we are." The transmission cut out, leaving Thomas alone with his thoughts. He looked at the coordinates Fletcher had sent, a system deep in the fringe, beyond any territory humanity officially claimed. It would take weeks to get there, assuming he could avoid the patrol routes and security checkpoints, assuming the hegemony didn't find him first. He thought about his daughter, somewhere in the inner systems. Probably grown up now with a family of her own. She'd be safer if he stayed away. They all would. Whatever he was, whatever potential the aliens feared, it had already cost him everything that mattered. But maybe it could be worth something now. Maybe it could help humanity find its place in a galaxy that saw them as nothing more than clever animals. Thomas fired up the engines and plotted a course for the fringe. Behind him, the dead moon spun silently in the void, keeping its secrets. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the promise of answers he wasn't sure he wanted. But for the first time in years, he wasn't running from something. He was running toward it. And that made all the difference. The journey to the fringe took 16 days. 16 days of silence, of watching the scanner for hostile contacts, of jumping through systems that barely registered on any star chart. Thomas kept the Valor running cold, minimal power, avoiding the major trade routes where hegemony patrols might be waiting. He passed through nebula fields and asteroid belts, threading the needle between radiation storms and gravity wells that would have crushed a less experienced pilot. He didn't sleep much. Every time he closed his eyes, the dreams came harder than before. Visions of vast machines stretching across star systems, of equations that described the fundamental structure of reality, of human minds networked together into something greater than the sum of their parts. He'd wake up gasping, his sheets soaked with sweat, the images burning in his memory like after-images from staring at the sun. On the 10th day, he started talking to himself. Not because he was going crazy, at least he didn't think so, but because the silence was worse than the sound of his own voice. He talked about his daughter, about the wife who'd left him, about the years in the Navy when he'd thought he could make a difference. He talked about the first time he'd realized he was different, when he was 8 years old, and he'd fixed a broken quantum router just by looking at it, understanding its architecture in a way that should have been impossible. His mother had been terrified. His father had called him a freak. They'd sent him to specialists, doctors who poked and prodded and ran tests that found nothing wrong. Normal human genetics, normal brain structure, normal everything. Except he wasn't normal, and they all knew it. By the time he was 12, they'd shipped him off to a boarding school in the outer colonies, paying good money to make him someone else's problem. Thomas had learned to hide it after that, learned to pretend he was just smart, not different. Learned to dumb himself down, to make mistakes on purpose, to be mediocre enough that no one looked too closely. It had worked, mostly. He'd made it through school, through the Navy, through the first few years of marriage. But you couldn't hide forever. Eventually, someone always noticed, and when they did, they ran. On the 14th day, his scanner picked up something. A signal, faint and irregular, coming from a station orbiting a gas giant in an unmarked system. Thomas checked the coordinates Fletcher had sent him. This was it. The edge of the fringe, the last outpost before uncharted space. He brought the Valor in slowly, weapons ready, half expecting an ambush. The station was old, pre-colony era, a spinning wheel of metal and composite that looked like it had been patched together from a dozen different ships. Docking ports jutted out at odd angles, and the hull was scarred with micrometeorite impacts and plasma burns. It looked like it had survived a war. A voice crackled over the comm. "Unidentified vessel, this is Waystation Echo. State your business or turn around." "I'm looking for the remnant," Thomas said. "Fletcher sent me." Silence. Then, "Fletcher's dead. Has been for 3 years." Thomas felt the blood drain from his face. Dead. The admiral who'd contacted him, who'd given him these coordinates, who'd promised him safety, dead for 3 years, which meant the transmission had been fake. A trap. He reached for the jump controls, but before he could activate them, the voice spoke again. "But he set up an automated protocol before he died. For people like you, dock at Port 7. We'll be waiting." The channel cut out. Thomas sat frozen, his mind racing. It could still be a trap. Probably was. But he'd come too far to turn back now. And if Fletcher had really set up a protocol, if the remnant was real, then maybe he'd finally get some answers. He docked at Port 7. The airlock cycled, and he stepped out into a corridor that smelled of oil and recycled air. 3 people were waiting for him. 2 men and a woman, all of them armed, all of them watching him with the kind of wary intensity that came from living on the edge of survival. The woman stepped forward. She was tall, dark-skinned, with close-cropped hair and eyes that had seen too much. "Thomas Reeve?" "Yeah." "I'm Lieutenant Shaw. These are Petrov and Nguyen. We're what's left of Fletcher's network. Come with us. We need to talk somewhere secure." Thomas followed them through the station, past corridors filled with people who looked like refugees, thin, haunted, carrying the kind of scars that came from running for your life. Children played in makeshift playgrounds built from scrap metal. Old men sat in corners, staring at nothing. The air was thick with desperation and defiance in equal measure. Shaw led him to a small room at the station's core, sealed the door, and gestured for him to sit. "You triggered a hegemony containment protocol. That's not something we see every day." "Fletcher told me I'm an anomaly. That there are others like me." "There were," Shaw said. "Most of them are dead now. The hegemony's been stepping up their hunts over the past few years. We've lost contact with at least a dozen cells. The ones who survive make it here, to the fringe, where the hegemony can't reach us, not easily, anyway." "Why are they hunting us? What did that scan find?" Shaw exchanged glances with Petrov and Nguyen. "You ever wonder why humanity showed up so late to the galactic party? Why every other species has been spacefaring for millennia while we were still banging rocks together?" "Evolution," Thomas said. "We're younger." "That's what they tell us. But it's not true. Humanity isn't younger. We're suppressed." Shaw leaned forward. "About 50,000 years ago, something happened to our species. Something that changed us at a fundamental level. The hegemony knows what it was. They've been monitoring Earth since before we discovered fire, making sure we stayed primitive, making sure we never reached our potential. But sometimes, despite their best efforts, someone slips through. Someone like you." Thomas shook his head. "That's insane. Why would they care about us?" "Because of what we could become," Nguyen said, speaking for the first time. His voice was quiet, measured. "The scan didn't just analyze your biology, Thomas. It analyzed your neural architecture. And what it found was a pattern that shouldn't exist in a species as young as humanity claims to be. A pattern that suggests we're not primitives at all. We're dormant." "Dormant?" "Our brains are wired for something more. Something the hegemony spent 50,000 years trying to suppress. When they scan an anomaly, they see that potential activated. They see what humanity could be if we were allowed to develop naturally, and it terrifies them." Thomas felt something cold settle in his chest. "What could we be?" Shaw smiled, but there was no warmth in it. That's what we're trying to figure out. Fletcher believed that anomalies are evolutionary throwbacks, humans whose genetics bypassed the suppression. When your abilities activate, you start thinking in ways that break the normal laws of cognition. Pattern recognition that borders on precognition. Technological intuition that shouldn't be possible. And in rare cases, she paused, mental abilities that the hegemony thought they'd bred out of us completely. Mental abilities? You mean telepathy? Telekinesis? That science fiction nonsense? Is it nonsense? Petrov asked. You've been having dreams, haven't you? Visions of things you couldn't possibly know? That's not your imagination, Thomas. That's your mind accessing information streams that normal humans can't perceive. The hegemony has spent millennia building their civilization on the assumption that species like us don't exist, that minds like ours can't exist. And when they scanned you, they found proof that their entire worldview is a lie. Thomas stood up, pacing the small room. This is crazy. You're telling me humanity is some kind of… what? Sleeping god? That we're all supposed to have superpowers? Not superpowers, Shaw said. Just the natural abilities of an unmolested species. Look at the hegemony races. They're stagnant. They've been using the same technology for thousands of years because they can't innovate. They can't think beyond the patterns they've been taught. But humans, we're creative, adaptable. We see connections they miss. And anomalies like you? You're what humans would have been if the hegemony hadn't interfered. You're a preview of humanity's future. Thomas sank back into his chair, his head spinning. So what do I do? Join your rebellion? Fight the hegemony? I'm just one man. For now, Shaw said. But there are more of you out there. More anomalies waiting to be found. Fletcher believed that if we could gather enough of them, if we could teach them to use their abilities, we might have a chance. Not to win, not yet, but to survive. To build something the hegemony can't destroy. And if I say no? Shaw's expression hardened. Then you run, and you keep running until they catch you. Because they will catch you, Thomas. The hegemony doesn't forget, they don't forgive, and they don't stop. Thomas looked at the three faces staring at him, at the hope and desperation warring in their eyes. He thought about his daughter, about the life he'd left behind, about the years of isolation and fear. He thought about the alien ship breaking apart, about the terror in those synthetic voices. And he thought about what Shaw had said, that he was a preview of humanity's future. Maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to find out what he really was. Tell me what you need me to do, he said. Shaw took him deeper into the station, past the refugee quarters, and into sections that looked like they'd been carved out of the original structure decades ago. The walls here were bare metal, cold to the touch, and the lighting was dim and flickering. They passed through security checkpoints manned by armed guards who looked at Thomas with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Word had already spread, apparently. The anomaly who'd triggered a containment protocol. The man the hegemony had been willing to destroy one of their own ships to silence. They entered a large chamber that had been converted into some kind of laboratory. Equipment filled every available surface. Quantum scanners, neural mapping devices, data cores that hummed with processing power. A dozen people worked at various stations, their faces illuminated by holographic displays showing patterns and equations Thomas recognized from his dreams. The sight of them made his chest tighten. He'd seen these exact configurations before. In visions he'd dismissed as meaningless. A man looked up from one of the displays. He was older than Thomas, maybe 60, with gray hair pulled back in a ponytail and the kind of lean, hungry look that came from obsession. His eyes locked onto Thomas with an intensity that was almost physical. "My God," the man whispered. "The readings were accurate. You're broadcasting." Broadcasting? Thomas frowned. What are you talking about? The man rushed over, pulling out a handheld scanner. Stand still, this won't hurt. He swept the device over Thomas's head, watching the readout with growing excitement. Unbelievable. Your neural activity is operating at frequencies we've only seen in theoretical models. You're not just an anomaly, you're a full manifestation. Shaw cleared her throat. Thomas, this is Dr. Raymond Hayes. He's been studying anomalies for the past 20 years. If anyone can explain what's happening to you, it's him. Hayes circled Thomas like a predator, still scanning. The hegemony suppression worked by introducing a genetic marker into early human populations. It limited neural plasticity, capped cognitive development, made sure we stayed within certain acceptable parameters. But the marker wasn't perfect. Occasionally, genetic drift or environmental factors would produce an individual who bypassed the suppression. Those individuals became shamans, prophets, visionaries, people who could see and do things others couldn't. The hegemony hunted them throughout history, disguising their interventions as natural disasters or plagues. You're saying they've been killing us for 50,000 years? Thomas felt sick. Not just killing. Culling. Whenever humanity showed signs of exceeding the acceptable threshold, they'd intervene. But they couldn't eliminate us entirely without raising suspicions. So they settled for containment. Keep humanity weak enough to control, strong enough to be useful. Hayes finally lowered the scanner, his expression grim. But something's changed in the last century. Anomalies are appearing at an accelerating rate. The suppression is breaking down. Why? We don't know. Some think it's environmental, exposure to technology or cosmic radiation weakening the genetic marker. Others believe it's evolutionary pressure, humanity adapting to overcome the suppression. Hayes thinks it's something else entirely. Shaw gestured to the displays around them. Show him. Hayes moved to the largest display, bringing up a star chart that showed the Milky Way galaxy. Red markers dotted the image, thousands of them clustered in certain regions. These are recorded hegemony interventions over the past 10,000 years. Notice the pattern? Thomas studied the map. The markers formed a spiral, emanating from a central point near the galactic core. They're spreading outward. Exactly, like a wave or an infection. Hayes zoomed in on the center point. This is where the hegemony originated, an empire built by 3 ancient species who achieved spaceflight roughly 200,000 years ago. They spread across the galaxy, establishing protocols, setting rules for how younger species should develop. But here's the interesting part. He pulled up another layer of data. Every species they've encountered falls into one of 2 categories. Either they're compliant, they accept hegemony oversight and integrate into the system, or they're extinct. They genocide anyone who doesn't submit. Not exactly. The extinct species all share common characteristics: high cognitive plasticity, rapid technological advancement. And in every case, the species was eliminated just as they were reaching a critical threshold of development. The hegemony calls it the ascension point, the moment when a species becomes too dangerous to control. Thomas felt the cold in his chest spreading, and humanity's approaching that point. We passed it 20 years ago, Hayes said quietly. The hegemony just doesn't know it yet. Or they do, and they're preparing their response. Either way, time's running out. That's why they're hunting anomalies so aggressively now. They're trying to delay the inevitable. What's inevitable? Hayes met his eyes. Human ascension, the full activation of our species' potential. When it happens, and it will happen, we'll either become something the hegemony can't control, or we'll be wiped out like all the others. There's no middle ground. Thomas laughed, a harsh sound. So we're facing extinction because we're too smart? That's insane. Is it? Nguyen had followed them into the lab. Think about it from their perspective. The hegemony has maintained order for 200,000 years. They've built a stable, predictable civilization. Then humans show up, and within a few thousand years, we're matching their technology. Within a few more, we might surpass it. That terrifies them. Because if we can do it, what's to stop other suppressed species from following our example? We're not just a threat, Petrov added, joining the conversation. We're proof that their entire system is built on a lie, that they're not the pinnacle of evolution, that there might be something beyond them. Shaw pulled up another display, this one showing neural scan data. The reason that Hegemony's ship broke down after scanning you is because its crew couldn't process what they were seeing. Their minds are too rigid, too structured. When confronted with a human neural pattern operating at full capacity, they experienced something close to cognitive dissonance. Imagine spending your entire life believing the sky is blue, and then someone shows you definitive proof that it's always been red. Your brain would reject it. You might even go mad trying to reconcile the contradiction. That's what happened to them, Hayes said. They scanned you, saw what you are, and their minds couldn't accept it. Some of them probably died instantly. Others would have suffered complete psychological breakdowns. The ship destroyed itself because the survivors chose death over madness. Thomas sank into a nearby chair, his legs suddenly weak. Jesus Christ. It gets worse, Shaw said. The hegemony will analyze what happened. They'll study the data from the ships that destroyed their scout vessel, and they'll conclude that you're not just an anomaly. You're an active threat. They'll send everything they have to eliminate you. Not capture, not study, eliminate. How long do I have? Days. Maybe a week. They're fast when they want to be. Shaw crossed her arms. That's why we need to move quickly. Hayes has been working on a theory. If we're right, your abilities aren't just random mutations. They're access points to something larger, a shared consciousness that all anomalies tap into without realizing it. Hayes nodded eagerly. The dreams you've been having? They're not just visions. They're memories. Information passed down through a network that connects every anomaly who's ever lived. The hegemony suppressed our individual development, but they couldn't suppress the collective. It's been growing in the background for 50,000 years, accumulating knowledge, waiting for enough anomalies to manifest simultaneously. You're talking about a hive mind. No, a hive mind implies loss of individuality. This is different. Think of it as a library. Every anomaly has access to the same information, but we each interpret it differently based on our unique experiences and perspectives. Together, we're stronger than the sum of our parts, but we're still individuals. Thomas thought about the dreams, about the sense of connection he'd sometimes felt, like voices just beyond the edge of hearing. How many anomalies are there? We know of 43 currently alive, Shaw said. There are probably more we haven't found. Fletcher believed that if we could bring them together, teach them to consciously access the network, we might be able to coordinate a defense against the hegemony, or at least buy ourselves time to figure out what we're really capable of. And you want me to help find them? We want you to do more than that. Hayes pulled up a final display, showing a complex diagram that made Thomas's head hurt. Your neural pattern is different from other anomalies we've studied. Stronger, more coherent. We think you might be a focal point, someone who can not only access the network, but amplify it. If we're right, you could link multiple anomalies together, let them share abilities in real time. You'd be the hub of humanity's collective consciousness. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Thomas looked at the faces around him, at the hope and desperation and fear. They were asking him to become something more than human, to sacrifice whatever remained of his individuality for the sake of a species that had never wanted him. But what choice did he have? The hegemony was coming. Humanity was facing extinction, and he was one of the few people who might be able to stop it. "When do we start?" he asked. Hayes smiled. "Right now." They strapped him into a chair that looked like it belonged in a torture chamber. Neural interface cables snaked from an overhead rig, connecting to contact points that Hayes carefully placed against Thomas's skull. The metal was cold, and he could feel the faint hum of electricity running through the system. Around him, displays flickered to life, showing real-time scans of his brain activity. Patterns of light dancing across three-dimensional models of his neural architecture. "This is going to feel strange," Hayes warned, his fingers flying across a control panel. "We're going to stimulate specific regions of your brain, areas that correspond to the network access points. You might experience disorientation, memory fragments that aren't yours, sensations that don't make sense. If it becomes too much, just say the word and we'll shut it down." Thomas gripped the armrests. "Get on with it." Hayes nodded to Shaw, who activated the system. The hum intensified, becoming a pressure inside Thomas's skull. Then the world exploded. He was no longer in the lab. He was everywhere and nowhere, his consciousness fragmenting across 1,000 different points of reference. He saw through other eyes. A woman running through a burning city, a man strapped to an examination table screaming as alien instruments carved into his flesh, a child huddled in darkness while explosions shook the walls. The images came faster, overlapping, a cascade of memories and experiences that weren't his, but felt as real as his own life. He saw Earth from orbit, watched civilizations rise and fall in the span of heartbeats. He saw the moment the hegemony arrived, their ships descending like gods from the stars, their technology so far beyond human understanding that entire populations fell to their knees in worship. He saw the genetic modifications being introduced, subtle changes woven into the fabric of humanity's DNA, suppressing the very traits that made them dangerous. And he saw the cullings, the plagues and wars and natural disasters that were anything but natural, carefully orchestrated to keep human population and potential within acceptable limits. But he saw resistance, too. Anomalies throughout history, refusing to submit, using their abilities to fight back even when it was hopeless. Prophets who saw the future and tried to warn their people. Warriors who moved faster than human reflexes should allow. Healers who could knit flesh and bone with a touch. Builders who raised monuments that defied the laws of physics. All of them hunted, all of them killed. But not before they left their mark, their knowledge, their defiance encoded into the network for future generations to access. Thomas felt himself reaching out, trying to touch those distant minds, and suddenly he wasn't alone anymore. There were others in the network, not many, maybe a dozen, but they were there, their presence like distant stars in an infinite void. He could feel their emotions, raw and unfiltered. Fear, anger, desperation, hope. They were all like him, all running, all trying to understand what they were. One presence felt closer than the others. A woman. Her thoughts brushed against his like a physical touch, and he gasped at the intimacy of it. She was somewhere cold, hiding in the ruins of an abandoned colony, and she was terrified. The hegemony had found her 3 days ago. She'd been running ever since, but they were closing in. She didn't think she'd make it another night. Thomas tried to speak to her, to offer some comfort, but he didn't know how. The connection felt fragile, like it might shatter if he pushed too hard. But she must have felt him anyway, because her fear lessened slightly. She sent him an image, a memory of her daughter, taken by the hegemony 5 years ago. She'd been hunting for her ever since, following rumors and whispers across a dozen systems. She'd become an anomaly, not through genetics, but through sheer force of will. Her mind breaking through the suppression because she refused to forget, refused to give up. The connection strengthened. Thomas could see through her eyes now, see the ruins around her, the twisted metal and shattered glass. He could feel the cold seeping into her bones, the hunger gnawing at her belly, the exhaustion that made every movement an effort. And he could feel something else. Footsteps approaching, mechanical and precise. Hegemony Hunter drones closing in on her position. No, he thought. Not her. Not like this. He reached deeper into the network, feeling for the other anomalies. Most of them were too far away, their connections too weak. But there were 3 who felt closer, their minds burning bright in the darkness. He grabbed those connections, pulled them toward him, and suddenly he could feel 4 consciousnesses merging into something greater. One of them was a mechanic on a freight station. A man named Gordon, who could understand any machine just by touching it. Another was a pilot, a young woman called Riley, who'd been flying ships since she was 12 and had never crashed once because she could feel the physics of space, like it was an extension of her body. The third was a soldier, a grizzled veteran named Theodore, who'd survived battles that should have killed him because he could predict enemy movements seconds before they happened. Thomas linked them together, using his consciousness as the hub, and felt their abilities flowing through the network. Gordon's understanding of technology, Riley's spatial awareness, Theodore's combat precognition, and the woman in the ruins, her name was Anna, her sheer, indomitable will. He wove them together, created something that none of them could achieve alone, and then he pushed that combined consciousness back into Anna. She gasped, feeling the sudden surge of knowledge and power. The drones were 20 meters away now, their sensors locked onto her position. But with Gordon's expertise, she understood their operating systems. With Riley's spatial sense, she knew exactly where they were without seeing them. With Theodore's precognition, she anticipated their attack patterns. And with Thomas holding them all together, she had the strength to act. Anna moved. Not like a terrified refugee, but like a warrior. She grabbed a piece of rebar from the rubble, and with Gordon's knowledge flowing through her, she understood that the metal contained trace elements that would disrupt the drone's magnetic guidance systems. She threw it at the precise angle Riley's spatial awareness dictated, hitting the lead drone exactly where Theodore knew it would be most vulnerable. The machine sparked and fell. The other 2 drones adapted, changing their approach pattern, but Anna was already moving, using Theodore's precognition to stay ahead of their targeting systems. She led them into a collapsed building, and with Gordon's expertise, she identified a power conduit still connected to the station's failing grid. She tore it open with her bare hands, ignoring the pain, and jammed the exposed wires into a puddle of water just as the drones entered. The electrical discharge fried their systems instantly. They dropped like stones. Anna collapsed, breathing hard, her hands burned and bleeding. But she was alive. Thomas felt her gratitude flowing back through the network, wordless but profound. The other anomalies were stunned, not quite believing what they'd just experienced. They'd always been alone, isolated by their differences. But for a few moments, they'd been part of something greater. They'd been united. Thomas opened his eyes. He was back in the lab, still strapped to the chair, his body drenched in sweat. Hayes was staring at him with an expression of awe. "What did you do?" the doctor whispered. "The readings. You weren't just accessing the network. You were controlling it, directing it. We recorded 5 separate anomaly signatures coordinating through you as a central node." Shaw leaned in. "What happened, Thomas?" he told them. About Anna, about the drones, about how he'd linked the anomalies together and used their combined abilities to save her life. The words felt inadequate, unable to capture the reality of what he'd experienced. The intimacy of those connections, the power of those merged consciousnesses. "This changes everything," Hayes said, his voice shaking. "If you can do that, if you can coordinate multiple anomalies in real time, we're not just talking about survival anymore, we're talking about an actual fighting chance." Nguyen looked skeptical. "One woman survived an encounter with hunter drones. That's impressive, but it's not going to stop the hegemony." "It's proof of concept," Petrov countered. "If Thomas can link 5 anomalies, he can link 50, 100, maybe more. Imagine an entire network of enhanced humans, all working together, all amplifying each other's abilities. The hegemony's never faced anything like that. Because they've spent 50,000 years making sure nothing like that could exist," Shaw said. She turned to Thomas. "Can you do it again? Can you reach more of them?" Thomas thought about the network, about the distant presences he'd felt, the other anomalies scattered across the galaxy. He thought about Anna and her daughter, about Gordon and Riley and Theodore, about all the people who'd been hunted and killed throughout history because they were different. And he thought about the hegemony, about their arrogance and their fear and their determination to keep humanity enslaved. "Yeah," he said. "I can do it. But we're going to need more than just anomalies. We're going to need ships, weapons, resources. We're going to need an army." Shaw smiled. "Then it's a good thing we've been preparing for this. Fletcher didn't just build a network of anomalies. He built a rebellion. And you're about to become its greatest weapon." Thomas felt the weight of those words settling on his shoulders. He'd come out here looking for answers, for safety, for a place to hide from a galaxy that feared him. Instead, he'd found a war. And somehow, impossibly, he'd become its linchpin. The hegemony was coming. Let them come. Humanity was done running. The Valor was no longer just a freight hauler. It was the heart of a rebellion. The station behind them buzzed with activity as anomalies from all across the fringe arrived, drawn by Thomas's network broadcast and the desperate hope it represented. Some came openly, risking capture to join the cause. Others slipped in under the cover of darkness, shadows among shadows, their minds quietly sinking to the growing collective. Thomas stood on the bridge, the weight of command heavy on his shoulders. He had never sought this. He'd only wanted answers, safe shelter from a galaxy that hunted him for being different. But now the galaxy was awakening, and humanity's time was running out. The hegemony was closing in, a storm that refused to relent, and the rebellion was the only shield between extinction and survival. Around him, the ship pulsed with life. Crewless, yet every system hummed in harmony, guided by his extended consciousness as it linked with the network's other nodes. He could feel their presence, the fear and hope, the pain and defiance of dozens of souls spread light years apart, but connected through the invisible threads weaving them together. Hayes entered, voice low. "We're ready to deploy the neural link on a larger scale. This next phase will push your abilities further, bring anomalies online who've never experienced the network before. The shock could be lethal." Thomas nodded, accepting the cold dread rising in his gut. "If even one of them dies, it's on me." Shaw's sharp voice cut through the tension. "Better a few losses than total annihilation. You're not alone anymore. We have to take the risk." The link was activated. Mental firestorm ignited as Thomas plunged deeper into the collective consciousness, pulling in scattered anomalies like strands of starlight woven into a single radiant tapestry. Some screamed in pain, overwhelmed by the surge. Others fell silent, their minds slipping into darkness. But many adapted, their powers awakening in dazzling bursts, telekinesis flickering like lightning, healing hands knitting flesh. Minds sifting through impossible data streams like gods. A new presence entered. Caleb, a former soldier with a shattered psyche and a tortured past. His rage burned bright, a wildfire waiting to be unleashed. Thomas anchored Caleb's tumultuous mind with gentle threads, steadying the tempest. "You're not alone, brother. We face this storm together." Caleb grunted, raw energy crackling beneath his skin. "Then let's burn them all down." But victory was a distant dream. The hegemony struck first. Warning alarms screamed across the Valor as interceptor drones sliced through the void like talons. The network crackled with fragmented cries of warning, anomalies under siege across multiple systems. Thomas snapped the link, pulling back to regain focus. "Battle stations," he commanded, voice steel and thunder. The Valor shuddered as laser blasts torn into shielded hull, flashes of plasma lighting the eternal darkness outside. The fight was chaos, a desperate dance of survival against enemies who had ruled the galaxy for eons. But humanity was different, unpredictable. The anomalies fought with minds unrestrained by eons of rigid control. They bent reality, turned enemy technology against itself, anticipated attacks before they fully formed. Thomas dipped into the network again, weaving patterns of defense and offense, channeling combined willpower into devastating strikes. A wave of telekinetic energy surged, shattering the leading drones like glass. Another anomaly, Jenna, used her newly activated abilities to project illusions that confused enemy targeting systems and turned their own weapons inward. Amid the turmoil, a brutal truth emerged. Within their ranks lurked a traitor. The hegemony's spies were masters of deceit, and one of the anomalies was feeding them information, sabotaging defenses from within. Trust shattered in a heartbeat. Thomas faced the betrayal with grim resolve. He hunted the spy through the network's tangled corridors and broken minds. It wasn't just a game of survival, but a test of his leadership, and the knowledge that one mistake could unravel everything they'd built. The spy was finally uncovered. Mara, a woman broken by years of fear, swayed by promises of safety from the overwhelming power hunting them. Her confession came in a whispered voice over the network, filled with tears and regret. "Forgive me," she pleaded. "I wanted to live." Thomas didn't answer right away. The network simmered with tension. Then he spoke, not as a judge, but as a leader. "If we're to survive, we must be stronger than our fears. You can redeem yourself by helping to fight the real enemy." Mara nodded, her presence now a shield of knowledge and espionage against the hegemony's movements. The rebellion endured. Each battle tore holes in their numbers, but forged bonds deeper than steel. Thomas kept pushing further, training the anomalies to control their powers, to link as one, to fight as a collective awakened species unbound by mortal fears. And yet, at night, Thomas sat alone at the command chair, memories clawing at his mind like ghosts. He thought of his daughter, of the daughter he had lost sight of when he chose the shadows. He wondered if she was somewhere out there, caught between worlds, human and something more. The network whispered faint echoes of distant presences, hinting she might be alive, perhaps an anomaly herself. The fight was far from over. The hegemony's grasp tightened, and the galaxy darkened. But humanity was awakening, and within that awakening was a promise that even in the face of annihilation, the raw, untamed spirit of humans would burn on, fierce and unyielding. Thomas Reeve had become more than a man. He was the vessel for humanity's defiance, the beacon in a galaxy that tried to silence them, and no matter the cost, he would not let that light die. Thomas felt the weight of the galaxy on his shoulders as the Valor shuddered under repeated blows. The battle outside was fierce. Cold fire met with human defiance. The hegemony's drones streamed forward, a relentless surge designed to crush every flicker of resistance. Yet, inside the ship, a different kind of war was being waged, a war of connection, of awakening. Seated in the neural chair, Thomas kept his mind locked to the network's pulse, his consciousness a bridge between scattered minds desperate for unity. The link fluctuated wildly as new anomalies activated, their raw, untamed power like wildfires, threatening to consume or to illuminate everything. He felt their fear, the fractures in their wills, the hope that threaded through their growing collective. It was not just a fight against the hegemony out in the void, it was a fight for control within themselves, a clash between the isolation that had defined their lives and the need to embrace a new, shared destiny. As the Valor's shields faltered and alarms blared, Thomas's mind soared through the neural web. He brought forward the face of Anna, victorious but frightened, Caleb, burning with rage, barely held in check, Riley, precise and calculating, Gordon, whose quiet strength shaped their technology, and the others, each a beacon in the dark. The hegemony's ships pierced deeper into the system now, but they were not alone. Anomaly vessels, more shadows than warships, emerged from hidden pockets, striking with sudden, impossible precision. Trials of human potential brought forth under immense pressure. Still, betrayals twisted like knives in their ranks. Mara's espionage scarce bridged the gap between mistrust and necessity, yet it reminded Thomas how fragile even this newfound unity was. Every moment, Thomas linked more anomalies. His mental light expanded, weaving a luminous lattice across a galaxy that had tried to crush their promise. The rebellion, once a whisper, became a roar. But amid the chaos, his thoughts drifted to a distant fragment of memory, a daughter lost to time and distance, perhaps herself touched by the hegemony's efforts, or blessed by the spark of this human spark that refused to be extinguished. The battle was ruthless, but humanity's raw, unpredictable spirit blazed like a supernova against the backdrop of an ancient empire grown stagnant with certainty. Thomas Reeve was no longer just a man on the run. He was the living conduit of a human future still untold, holding the line against oblivion with every fragment of fractured consciousness he could reach. No matter the cost, the light of rebellion would not die. It would spread, fierce and unyielding, because this was humanity, and they were never meant to fade quietly into the dark. Thomas sat alone in the dim corner of the Valor's command deck, the hum of the ship's systems a dull echo against the storm raging outside. The vastness of space spread beyond the viewport, black, indifferent, endless, and for a moment the weight of everything felt crushing. The fight was no longer just for survival. It was a war to reclaim what humanity had lost, to reignite a spark they were told had been extinguished millennia ago, and Thomas, flawed and worn though he was, had become the reluctant beacon for that spark. His connection to the network still pulsed faintly in his mind. The link to the scattered lives of anomalies, those fractured shards of humanity, each gifted and cursed, felt like a lifeline and a cell at once. He thought of Anna, the woman he had helped save through the collective will. Caleb's burning rage barely held in check, Riley's steady, precise mind, Gordon's quiet wisdom, the many other voices woven into his consciousness. Each one carried the raw, chaotic potential of a species awakening from a long sleep. But the hegemony was relentless. Their ships surrounded the system now, a suffocating net of advanced technology and cold calculation. The remnants of the scout vessel that had scanned Thomas, consumed by madness and destruction, were a warning. The Empire feared what humanity might become. They saw human minds untethered from imposed limits and knew their control was at risk. The Valor shuddered as laser fire streaked across its shields. Thomas's hand hovered near the weapons console, fingers twitching. his mind stretched, reaching out through the network once more. He could feel the fear and resolve of the anomalies scattered across the fringe. Many had yet to awaken fully, and some had already fallen. Their power was a flickering flame in a storm of overwhelming force. His neural link pulsed as Hayes and Shaw worked frantically to stabilize new anomaly activations. The sudden rush of raw, untrained power often bordered on lethal. A wrong surge could fracture a mind permanently, one less warrior in the coming war. Thomas's thoughts flickered to his daughter. The line he had lost, the family torn apart by secrets and alien interference. Somewhere out there, she carried a legacy he barely understood. Had she crossed the threshold? Become one of them? Or was she just as stranded as he had been? The battle outside became a symphony of chaos, an echo of clashing wills and shattered lives. The hegemony's drones advanced like waves against a rocky shore, each one a ruthless executor of imperial will. Yet humanity's rebellion grew stronger with every strike. Anomaly-piloted craft emerged from hidden bases, swift and unpredictable, harnessing abilities that defied explanation. Thomas's mind soared through the collective consciousness, fusing the powers of those linked to him. Where Gordon's understanding of technology gave them advantage in disabling enemy systems, Riley's spatial genius diverted attacks. Caleb's combat instincts anticipated moves before they formed, a brutal mind shaped by loss and rage, and Anna's fierce will shaped them all into a unified force. But within their ranks, betrayal lurked. Mara's confession had shaken them to their foundation, a reminder that fear was a weapon just as deadly as any laser. Her return to their side was tentative, but her knowledge brought insights about the hegemony's movements and strategies. Trust was fragile, every alliance a test. Thomas's thoughts sharpened. The network was more than a battlefield tool. It was a revelation, a window into humanity's past and potential future. The hegemony's suppression, spanning 50 millennia, had been a war on the human mind itself. A subtle control that twisted evolution, tamped down innovation, forced humanity to crawl where they should have soared. But every suppression has its cracks. Every cage eventually rusts. The anomalies were proof. Minds gifted beyond the imposed limits, rising up despite the centuries of control. "Captain, another salvo inbound." Shaw's voice cut the tense silence. Thomas's fingers danced over the consoles. Launching countermeasures powered by the collective genius linked to him, waves of energy distorted enemy sensors, illusions crafted from Riley's projections warped targeting systems, and bursts of telekinesis crippled attacking drones. Yet the stations under siege screamed with the weight of losses, those who couldn't hold the line, whose burnout came too soon. Thomas gritted his teeth, carrying every death like a brand. In the quiet moments, the weight of leadership settled heavy. Was he leading humanity to salvation or dragging it toward ruin? The network whispered voices, some hopeful, others raw with despair. Each was a thread woven into the vast tapestry of human potential, a future hanging by fragile, flickering strands. A new transmission cut through the noise. Static greeted him before a familiar voice, low and urgent. "It's time!" Hayes and Shaw exchanged a glance. The phrase carried meaning beyond its brevity, a pivotal moment approaching. Thomas realized what it meant. The awakening, the true test of the network's power, and the moment humanity would stop hiding in the fringe and step into the galaxy's harsh light. The Valor slipped from the shadows, carrying the rebellion's heart to a forgotten system, a nexus where anomalies gathered, ready to ascend beyond the limitations imposed by time and empire. Thomas, tethered to the network, felt the electric surge of potential pulsing in the gathered minds. Anomalies hidden across the galaxy converged, their combined power swelling as education and control steadied their wild gifts. But power unrestrained is a double-edged blade. Old wounds and fears festered beneath the surface. Some anomalies resisted the necessary discipline, their individuality burning too fiercely to submerge in a collective. Arguments flared, alliances strained, a fragile peace threatened to crumble. Thomas found himself mediating not just a rebellion strategy, but the fracture lines within the human soul. A raw battle between freedom and unity, individuality, and the demands of survival. One night, alone in the observation deck, Thomas's face was bathed in the cold glow of distant stars. Memories flooded. His wife's departure, the silence of his daughter's absence, the crushing loneliness of years spent running. In the vast cold around him, a single thought burned clear. Humanity was more than the sum of its wounds and betrayals. It was a flicker of hope, a stubborn defiance that refused to die. He whispered into the darkness, "We are more than they ever imagined." Back within the network, the anomalies responded. An echo, a promise, a vow. The war was only beginning. But now, as Thomas Reeve stood at the center of humanity's awakening, the hegemony would learn a brutal truth. A human mind unbound was a force that no empire could contain. The silence after the last battle was heavier than the sound of gunfire. The Valor drifted among the wreckage of a dozen hegemony drones, its engines humming weakly, its hull scarred and glowing with residual heat. The smell of ozone clung to the recycled air, mingling with human sweat and fatigue. In the command deck's dim light, Thomas Reeve stood at the viewport, staring into the endless black. He hadn't slept in 2 days. Couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, the network whispered to him. Fragments of thoughts, emotions, the cries of anomalies scattered across the galaxy. They were calling for direction, begging for guidance, for unity. Some he could comfort, some he could not. Others just slipped away, their minds extinguished in silence. Humanity's awakening had begun, but it came with pain and blood. Behind him, Dr. Hayes adjusted the calibration nodes of the neural dampeners. The last pulse cost us 6 minds. Neural burnout. They were too far from the center. They drew too much energy through the link. Thomas closed his eyes for a moment. We knew there'd be losses. We also knew there'd be limits, Hayes replied, sharply. But you keep pushing them. Every time you stretch the link, the feedback grows. You're burning through human minds like fuel. Thomas turned, weariness in his gaze. We're out of time. The hegemony's assembling fleets on 3 fronts. They're not sending drones anymore. They're sending ships crewed by their old ones. The psychics, Hayes. The ones who can control minds through quantum resonance. If we don't unify the network now, they'll pick us apart system by system. Shaw entered then, gaze steady but hard. Intel confirms he's right. The hegemony's flagship group entered fringe space 12 hours ago. Estimated contact, 30 hours. She dropped a data pad on the table, where holograms of the incoming ships shimmered into view. Sleek, perfect, terrifying in their precision. Once they hit the line, the rebellion dies unless we find something that can stop them. Something. Someone. Hayes knew what she meant before she said it. You want to use him as a weapon. Thomas didn't protest. The idea had taken root days ago. The network wasn't just a tool. It was an army waiting to be led. If he could focus it, synchronize hundreds of human minds into a single unified attack, they might stand a chance against the hegemony's psychic strike forces. But it was a dangerous gamble. Too much pressure, and he could fry every mind linked to him, including his own. Shaw's tone softened, almost reluctant. You're the only one who's ever stabilized a node that large. If anyone can control that much power, it's you. Thomas stared at the ships flickering in holographic light. He remembered the screams of the alien crew who had scanned him, the raw terror in their final words. Fear, not hatred, not arrogance, real fear. They saw something in him they couldn't understand. Something even they, the ancient rulers of the galaxy, were not prepared to face. He looked back at Shaw. Then let's give them another reason to be afraid. The war room became a cathedral of human defiance. Hayes and his tech crews worked non-stop to expand the network amplifier, a spherical construct of neural conduits, energy fields, and quantum circuits that resembled a living brain made of light. Cables ran in veins across the floor, feeding power drawn from reactor cores and psychic resonance engines. At its center was a chair, the core interface. Thomas stared at it like a man facing his own grave. This thing will let you connect to every anomaly in network range, Hayes explained. A few thousand, at least, depending on signal strength. You'll be the link, the hub. Every thought, every fear, every heartbeat will pass through you. And if it fails? Shaw asked quietly. Then his mind burns, Hayes said. And possibly everyone else's, too. Thomas stepped forward and placed a hand on the glowing interface. It was warm, alive. He could feel the hum of human thought pulsing faintly through it. Activate it. Thomas, Hayes began, but Shaw's nod silenced him. The decision was made. They strapped him in, the machine hissing softly as neural links fused to his skin. The light intensified, shifting from white to a deep, living gold. As the interface engaged, Thomas felt himself sliding out of his body, his mind dissolving into something vast. He was everywhere at once. He felt the breath of thousands of others, anomalies across star systems, hidden in colonies, wandering derelicts, fighting in the bleak corners of forgotten worlds. He tasted their pain, their confusion, their loneliness. Then he felt their recognition. Him, the mind that had reached out months ago, that had united them in small fragments. They opened themselves to him willingly. The network exploded into clarity. Every consciousness merged into a wave of thought so immense it felt like creation itself. Thomas saw memories, centuries of humanity's oppression flashing before his eyes. He felt the echo of ancient minds that had once whispered of stars before being silenced. He saw the hegemony manipulating early tribes, seeding myths to keep humanity docile, rewriting history in blood and shadow. And deeper still, beneath the layers of pain and memory, something stirred, a pulse older than even the hegemony, something human, radiant and pure. It throbbed in rhythm with the heartbeat of the galaxy itself. Awake now, aware, hungry. Thomas let go of fear and gave himself to it. The ship trembled. Hayes shouted commands. The readings went insane. Neural resonance reached levels thought physically impossible. Thomas's body convulsed, eyes shining gold. The network was no longer a series of connections. It was one mind, one will. Humanity, united in a single thought of survival. He saw the incoming fleet then. The hegemony's psychic warships emerged from hyperspace, their forms elegant, beautiful, perfect. Their minds reached out like hooks, searching for weakness. Thomas could feel them. Powerful, disciplined, ancient. But they weren't ready for what they found. He opened the network like a storm. Thousands of human minds struck at once. Thoughts became weapons, emotion became lightning, reality bent under the weight of collective imagination. The hegemony's psychic warriors screamed as their control fractured. Their perfect order crumbled under the chaos of human will, rage, grief, hope, defiance, all erupting like solar fire. It wasn't a battle, it was revelation. For the first time in millennia, the hegemony feared. Their ships faltered, their psychic lattice dissolving under the incomprehensible weight of what they'd suppressed. Thomas felt their confusion, the impossibility of minds that didn't follow logic, that didn't obey pattern. Humans weren't gods, they were mess. Glorious, defiant, unstoppable mess. But power demands cost. Thomas's body began to fail. Neural overload surged like a tidal wave. Blood trickled from his nose, his ears, his eyes. The link threatened to collapse. Hayes screamed for a shutdown, but Shaw stopped him, clutching the rail until her knuckles went white. "If we cut him now, it's all gone," she said. "Everything." Thomas knew it too. He could feel himself unraveling. But the unity, oh, the unity, was beyond anything he'd ever imagined. He reached for the heart of the network, for the source of that ancient hum that lay buried within the human genome. And in that instant he understood. The hegemony hadn't created humanity. They'd found it, and they'd feared it ever since. The suppression, the control, the containment. It hadn't been conquest. It had been panic. Humanity was the anomaly in the galaxy's plan, the unpredictable element, the fire that refused to stay cold. Every world they'd conquered, every species they'd guided, had been their attempt to erase chaos, and humans were chaos personified. Thomas laughed through the pain, the sound echoing across the network. "You should have left us in the dark," he whispered into the void. "You should have let us stay small." He unleashed the network one last time. It was beautiful. Light poured from the Valor's hull, spreading across space like the birth of a star. Every anomaly blazed with psychic fire, humanity's collective spirit roaring into the cosmos. The hegemony fleet shattered, not destroyed by weapons, but consumed by realization. Their minds broke trying to comprehend what they saw, the impossible truth that their control was over. Then everything went dark. When Thomas woke, the silence was deafening. He gasped for air and found himself lying in the medbay, wires snaking from his chest. Hayes sat nearby, bloodshot eyes staring at data on a flickering monitor. Shaw stood beside the bed. "You did it." His voice came out rough. "The fleet? Broken. They pulled back. The whole sector's in chaos. We don't know what we are to them now, enemy, god, or nightmare." He tried to smile, but it hurt too much. "All three, probably." Hayes leaned forward. "You burned half the neural amplifiers. But the network, Thomas, it didn't collapse. The minds you linked, they're still connected. All of them. Even now they're adapting to the resonance you created. Humanity is changing." "Changing how?" Hayes hesitated. "Faster, smarter. Their neural activity is off every scale we've ever measured. You didn't just unite us, you broke the suppression. Permanently." Thomas stared at the ceiling, the weight of the words sinking in. For the first time in his life, he felt it. A world not suffocated by fear, but breathing freely. The cost had been immense, but the future was theirs again. Shaw's expression softened. "The hegemony will come back. They always do." Thomas nodded. "Then we'll be ready. Next time they won't be facing humans hiding in the dark." He turned his head slightly, eyes meeting hers. "They'll be facing what we were always meant to be." The light outside the viewport flared brighter, a newborn star illuminating the wreckage field. The first light of a new human dawn. In the network's depths, countless minds stirred. The age of suppression was over. The age of humanity had begun. The new dawn rose cold. From orbit, Earth was barely recognizable. The pale blue marble Thomas remembered from his childhood had become covered with glowing fractures of light, city grids powered by human neural matrices. New civilizations rebuilding faster than physics said they should. It had only been 7 years since that battle. 7 years since he had united humanity into one fused consciousness for the briefest, brightest moment in galactic history. He hadn't meant to become the symbol of it. He hadn't wanted worship or legend. But when you break your species free from 50,000 years of chains, people carve your name into their myths, whether you like it or not. Thomas Reeve, the vessel. He hated the title. Behind him, on the observation deck of the rebuilt Valor, Dr. Hayes adjusted the neural calibrators on his wrist console. His beard had gone almost completely silver, but his eyes still burned with that relentless curiosity. "It holds," he murmured. "The network's stable. The resonance pattern hasn't decayed." "You realize what that means?" Thomas smirked faintly without looking away from the planet. "That my headaches are permanent?" Hayes chuckled. "That humanity has evolved, Thomas. Permanently. Even the unlinked minds, the baseline population, they're different now. Intelligence metrics off the charts, neuroregeneration accelerated, empathy—" He hesitated, glancing down at his readings. "Well, that one fluctuates." "Empathy doesn't scale neatly," Thomas murmured. "Some people grow better hearts. Some grow sharper knives." Hayes shifted uneasily. "You predicted the hegemony would retreat after the battle. I didn't believe you. But 7 years, Thomas. 7 years, and not a single fleet returned. Not a probe, not even a whisper from their space. What did you do to them?" Thomas's gaze stayed fixed on the spinning Earth. His reflection in the glass looked older now, scarred, lined with exhaustion that sleep couldn't cure, eyes burning faintly with that golden shimmer that had never faded. "I broke them the only way that lasts," he said softly. "I made them see themselves." Hayes frowned. "I don't understand." "Fear," Thomas said. "They saw ours. They saw what it means to feel, the chaos, the pain, the hunger that drives us to create. They're made of order, Doctor. They can't survive madness. I let them taste it." Hayes was silent for a long moment. "Then they'll never come back." "They will," Thomas said flatly, "because they can't stand what we represent, a species that doesn't obey the pattern. And when they do, they'll come harder, smarter. The quiet won't last forever." Hayes stared at him, realization dawning. "You're preparing for them." Thomas turned, finally looking at him. "We all are." The Valor descended through Earth's mag shield, slicing through ionized clouds and artificial auroras. New cities glimmered along the continents below. Organic shapes grown from bioalloys, pulsating faint light as if alive. Humanity had leapt forward half a millennium in 1 decade. Neural engineering replaced computers. Starships were powered by cognitive resonance, not fusion drives. Entire planets now thrummed with the pulse of a collective mind, still learning what it meant to be free. But for all the progress, Thomas could feel the cracks forming, hairline fractures threading through the unity he had once forged. He landed in the Eurasian sprawl, the largest city on the reborn Earth. Towers curved skyward like the bones of sleeping titans. Streets glowed with soft bioluminescence from engineered moss. People moved like currents of light through the vast avenues, each one carrying the faint shimmer in their eyes that marked post-suppression humans, conscious minds vibrating a little too fast, sparks of awareness bleeding into the edges of perception. They hailed him as he walked. Quiet nods, subtle bows, reverent murmurs at the edge of hearing. He ignored them. Adoration made him uneasy. Shaw waited for him at the heart of the Central Council building. She looked older, her hair streaked with silver, but her bearing was the same. Iron spine, sharp eyes. She wore the insignia of the new Terran Alliance, though Thomas had never cared for titles. "You came," she said simply. "You called," Thomas replied, lowering himself into the chair opposite her. The room was circular, lined with holographic windows showing the stars beyond. He could feel the faint undercurrent of hundreds of neural signatures drifting through the air like static. Ministers, technicians, scientists, the governing minds of a species that had outgrown its own politics. "It's starting," Shaw said. "The fractures we warned about." "I felt them," he admitted. "The resonance fluxes, disconnection spirals." "They're not just fluxes," she said. "Entire sectors are fragmenting. The network's failing. Some colonies don't respond at all. Others—" She hesitated. "Others have gone dark. Completely. Like the minds inside them just folded in on themselves." Thomas leaned forward. "Collapsed?" "Or something worse," Shaw said. "You told us unity would hold. That whatever we became, it would adapt. But we've reached the limit, Thomas. The human mind wasn't built to share infinity." His chest tightened. He remembered the battle, the rush of thousands of minds fused into perfect synchronicity. It had been transcendence, terror, and agony all at once. He had believed the network would eventually find equilibrium. But maybe that was his arrogance. Maybe what humanity called unity was really another kind of cage. "How long do we have?" he asked quietly. Shaw's eyes hardened. "Before it all tears apart? Months, maybe less. Hayes thinks we've triggered a cognitive feedback loop. The stronger the network gets, the less individual minds can handle the load." "And the hegemony?" Thomas asked. "Still silent," she said. Then, after a pause, "Maybe they're waiting for this. Maybe they knew we'd break ourselves." Thomas stood, jaw set. "Then we'll fix it before they find the pieces." He returned to the Valor that night and reactivated the interface he swore he'd never touch again. The neural amplifiers hummed like restless ghosts. Hayes stood beside him, refusing to meet his gaze. "If you do this again, it could kill you." Thomas smiled faintly. "You keep saying that." "Because it's true." He stepped into the chair anyway. The metal was cold against his skin. "You ever think maybe that's what makes us different, Hayes? We know it'll kill us, and we still do it." As the machine powered up, reality flickered. The ship disappeared, replaced by a sky of shifting light. The network unfolded around him, fractured, beautiful, devastating. Billions of voices merged and separated like tides, forming patterns that defied logic. He could feel the turbulence Shaw had described. Storms of thought collapsing into madness, entire colonies trapped in recursive loops of collective fear. He dove deeper. Images rushed by, a city drowning in static as its citizens spoke in unison, their individuality melting away. Children born with eyes that glowed too bright. Scientists staring into their own neural projections until their minds bled out. The network, once humanity's salvation, was becoming an addiction, a trap that replaced choice with connection until no one remembered what loneliness tasted like. At its center, Thomas found something worse, the residue of his own creation. His consciousness, the template he had used to forge the unified mind, had echoed across the network. Millions of fragments of him nested inside human thought. Reflections, ghosts, copies. Each one fracturing, evolving, making choices he hadn't. The realization crushed him. He wasn't the savior of humanity. He was the virus. "Thomas?" Hayes's voice trembled through the interface. "What's happening?" He barely heard him. The network pulsed like a heart, black veins spreading through golden light. The humans within it were changing, uncertain if they were expanding or consuming themselves. There was only one way to stop it. Thomas reached for the core, a massive, luminous sphere where all human consciousness intersected. It shone with unbearable light, but beneath it, he saw the shadow of something ancient, the residue of the suppression field the hegemony had built so long ago. The field wasn't gone. It had fused with the network, waiting for the resonance to reach this exact point before triggering self-destruction. A trap. The bastards had known. If it activated fully, it would collapse not just the network, but every human mind connected to it. Billions of lives. Thomas gritted his teeth, pain spiking through his skull. Hayes, listen to me. You have to initiate a cascade reboot sequence, manual override, sector by sector, slow the resonance. It's too late, Hayes shouted across the link. The feedback's exponential, you can't contain it. Thomas's vision fractured, the world splintering into gold and black. The screams of billions echoed through the void, a chorus of human terror and defiance. He could feel their pain, their fear of losing themselves again after fighting so hard to be free. He made his choice. He anchored himself to the core. Others had called him the vessel without understanding what it meant. But he understood it now. The network needed a singular mind to absorb the chaos, to burn itself out through one consciousness instead of many. It wouldn't survive otherwise. He took a slow breath and whispered into the connection, his voice reaching every mind across humanity. It's all right. Let go. The light consumed him. Pain unlike anything he could imagine tore through every nerve. The network screamed, then contracted, collapsing into him like a dying star. His body arched in the chair, eyes blazing white. Hayes shouted his name. Shaw ran into the lab, grabbing his shoulders, but it was too late. His mind was gone, stretched beyond matter into the fold of space where thought took form. Then silence. For a heartbeat, or maybe an eternity, nothing moved. And then the light dimmed. The Valor's alarms quieted, the resonance readings stabilized. One by one, the human voices returned, disconnected, separate, breathing. The network hadn't died. It had reset. Humanity was free again, but not bound together, not enslaved by their own unity. Hayes stared at the lifeless form in the chair, tears cutting through the grime on his face. He did it, he whispered. Shaw stood beside him, trembling. What's left of him? Before Hayes could answer, a faint flicker of light sparked across the console. Neural energy, soft, rhythmic. The readings registered one pulse, then another. The ship's system, drawing power from nowhere, spoke in Thomas's voice. Don't let them forget who they are. The lights across the viewport brightened, as if the stars themselves were listening. The network remained silent, peaceful now, stable, but beneath its stillness, in the faint hum of transmission bands, a signature persisted. Thomas Reeve wasn't gone. He had become the network. Years later, they would tell stories about the man who had become the mind of humanity. Some said he ascended, others that he burned away. But those who listened to the stars late at night swore they could hear a whisper in the static between worlds, a quiet, steady voice reminding them that chaos was not their curse. It was their freedom. And somewhere, across the void that once bound humanity to fear, a new signal stirred.